The word canon has always been a touchy subject for a select group of Fallout fans. On one hand, some believe that each and every game is unique and that the story you experience is the only canon you will ever need, and in the end, your own personal canon is the canon. On the other hand, some believe that each game, while unique to the player, doesn't matter in the end because Bethesda's canon is the canon. I tend to fall under both categories here. Fallout games are supposed to be your own story. What you experience is 100% your story. However, as new games are released, there needs to be some concrete details in order to continue the story. You need a canon series of events to progress the overarching story of the world. Because if everything was continually open-ended, then the universe would end before it even started, forever stagnant, exploring, then abandoning tiny pockets of the world so as to not step on your personal canon. So at the end of the day, the overarching canon of the Fallout universe is important, and the most important canon is what happens to us, what happens to the player character. Over the course of 6 canon Fallout games, the canonicity of Fallout Tactics is in limbo and Brotherhood of Steel isn't. There has never once been a repeat protagonist. The only thing we get in new games are very subtle references and nods to past player characters. Nothing has ever been truly concrete. Everything has always been hearsay. So that raises the question, what becomes of these protagonists? So today we're going to break down every bit of official lore of each protagonist, that being the Vault Dwellers, the Vault Dweller, the Chosen One, the Lone Wanderer, the Courier, and the Sole Survivor, and then theorize about what the most likely canonical version of said character actually did. Full spoilers ahead of all Fallout games and Season 1 of the Fallout show. Fallout 76 is a rather unique entry in the Fallout universe. This is the only game where there isn't really a protagonist. Instead, it's protagonists, i.e. all the people playing this multiplayer Fallout. Yeah, there is a story, but I assume canonically it's not one person making waves in the area. It's a collection of the Vault Dwellers from Vault 76. Also, with this game still receiving updates 6 years after release, at the time of this video, the game technically isn't over yet. So what becomes of the Vault 76 Dwellers or the people of Appalachia? Well, we just don't know yet. But we can make some educated guesses. Fallout 76 is the earliest entry in the Fallout timeline. It takes place in 2102. In fact, Fallout 1 doesn't happen until nearly 60 years after the events of this game. And even still, with the latest entry in the series, that being the Fallout show, it takes place in 2296. So there is nearly 200 years of missing information about Appalachia. No word from the Brotherhood of Steel chapter there, no word from the Responders, no word from the Free States, and no further spread of the Scorch. So what happened? Well, if we take Fallout 76's endgame as an example, then maybe it's because there's nothing left. Once you beat the main questline of Fallout 76, the Vault Dwellers are tasked with destroying the Scorched Plague by dropping a nuke on the Scorched Beast Queen who spreads the infection. And this does work, as a year later the Vault Dwellers even make a vaccination for the plague, thus bringing life back to Appalachia. But what if it's just delaying the inevitable? What if the infection mutates again and becomes a more powerful variant, or a new transmission method is discovered? There are still multiple nukes all over Appalachia, so potentially the whole thing ends with the Vault Dwellers doing one last ditch effort to stop the Scorch by destroying Appalachia. Essentially wipe the whole area clean. There's never a mention of the region in later Fallouts, and yes, it's obvious because those games came out before 76, but this would be a clean way to explain why it never comes up again. The whole place just becomes a wasteland. The game starts appearing as though the nukes never touched the land, giving us a lush and pristine environment to explore. But as we know, good things in the Fallout universe can never last. So perhaps the final expansion of Fallout 76 involves the people of Appalachia making the ultimate sacrifice in order to safeguard humanity, destroying everything and finally bringing the true apocalypse to Appalachia. Or it's all a simulation. This theory, that's gaining a little bit more traction nowadays, states that the events of Fallout 76 are all in a simulation, equivalent to the technology we've seen in the Memory Den and Vault 112. In the White Springs bunker, we can find a terminal where someone writes that they believe that they, and everyone around them, are trapped in a virtual strategic simulation game, which was the virtual training aid we used during the Operation Anchorage DLC. Also, some graffiti can be found in multiple locations across Appalachia that states, "Nothing is real." These two things have led many to believe that the events of Fallout 76 are indeed a simulation. However, the biggest plot hole in this theory is the existence of multiple pieces of lore that Vault-Tec shouldn't have known of, such as the Brotherhood of Steel, Caps, ghouls, super mutants, and so on and so forth. The only way for the simulation theory to make sense is for someone to be actively updating the system based on events in the outside world, which would be a huge leap. So I'm more inclined to believe that everything did actually happen and just everyone dies in the end. Going in the complete opposite direction in terms of lore, we actually know the most about what happened to the protagonist of Fallout 1, compared to any other protagonist in the series. This is because of the supplementary material that was released alongside Fallout 2, titled The Vault Dweller's Memoirs. In his memoirs, an elderly Vault Dweller writes his life story, as requested by the new leader of his tribe. It is widely accepted that of the 3 pre-made characters of Fallout 1, Albert Cole is the canonical protagonist, though it's never been confirmed other than the fact that we know the Vault Dweller was canonically male. In his memoirs, the Vault Dweller speaks of the water chip's malfunction, and how he was tasked with finding a replacement out in the wastes. Along the way, the Vault Dweller encounters various individuals and factions, each with their own agendas and motivations. These include the Brotherhood of Steel, super mutants, and various settlements struggling to survive in the aftermath of the apocalypse. As the Vault Dweller delves deeper into the wasteland, they uncover the existence of the Master, a mutated being intent on transforming humanity into a unified entity under his control. The Master's army of super mutants poses a dire threat to the remaining pockets of civilization, driving the Vault Dweller to take action to stop him. After gathering allies and resources, the Vault Dweller confronts the Master at his base of operations, known as the Cathedral, and in his final battle, the Vault Dweller defeats the Master and destroys the source of his influence, bringing an end to the immediate threat posed by the super mutants. And with the Master defeated and the wasteland saved, the Vault Dweller returns to Vault 13, but finds himself unable to return as the Overseer banishes him because he could no longer trust the Vault Dweller, or what he had become. And so, the Vault Dweller left. He wandered the desert, but never moved too far from the mountains that shielded Vault 13 from the rest of the world. He would eventually find a small group of Vault 13 runaways who, after hearing his story, would leave with him and head north, occasionally sending scouts to Vault 13 to gather others who wished to leave. Over time, the group turned into a tribe and established the village of Arroyo, where the Vault Dweller fell in love with a woman named Pat, and together they had 2 daughters. As the village grew, the Vault Dweller had little time to explore, as he was too preoccupied with training the inhabitants in skills needed for survival in the wasteland. He and Pat would become the leaders of Arroyo, and sometime later Pat would pass away, leaving the Vault Dweller to solely lead the tribe until the time of writing his memoirs, where, once completed, he would leave Arroyo, leaving behind his vault suit folded on his bed with his memoirs signed simply as The Wanderer. 80 years after the events of Fallout 1, the Vault Dweller's grandchild, known as the Chosen One, is tasked with finding a Garden of Eden creation kit, or GECK, to save Arroyo from a drought. Heading to Vault 13, the Chosen One discovers it is abandoned, save for a colony of Deathclaws. They then explore the wastes, running into a fledgling NCR, the Brotherhood of Steel, and eventually New Reno. It is strongly suggested that the Chosen One was male because in New Reno, unbeknownst to John Bishop, leader of the Bishop crime family, the Chosen One either sleeps with his wife or daughter, and together they have a son that runs the family many years later. This is confirmed in Fallout New Vegas.
You don't know Mr. Bishop. He's not like other bosses up there. He knows the wasteland like the back of his hand, and he likes to wander it.
Not long after the destruction of the Enclave, the Bishop family of New Reno was blessed with a child. This child seemed to have little in common with the Bishops, preferring instead to spend his days exploring the wastes. When he turned 13, he seized control of the Bishop family and led them to victory over the remaining New Reno families. He died quietly in his sleep at the age of 73, never having known his real father.
As for what else the Chosen One did, it's not exactly important to their character as a whole. Returning to Arroyo, he finds his home empty, as while he was gone, the remnant of the US government, known as the Enclave, abducts everyone. Infiltrating the Enclave base at Navarro and destroying their oil rig, the Chosen One stops the Enclave, finds a GECK, and saves not only his people, but the survivors of Vault 13, who also were abducted by the Enclave. In the aftermath, the Chosen One returns home with the GECK, and with the help of his people and those from Vault 13, resettles, building a new community with the GECK, where the Chosen One would become the Elder, presiding over the village for many years to come. Now, I'd be remiss not to mention a very prevalent fan theory regarding the Chosen One, that being the Chosen One is actually Nobark Noonan from Fallout New Vegas. So let's break it down. In the Fallout Bible, it states that the Chosen One was born on March 23rd, 2221. Fallout 2 takes place in 2241, placing the Chosen One at 20 during the events of Fallout 2. Fallout New Vegas takes place in 2281, placing the Chosen One at 60. So it's more than likely that during the events of Fallout New Vegas, the Chosen One is still alive, and based on his appearance, Nobark is roughly around the same age, but we don't have any solid confirmation. Just outside of Novak, the city Nobark is found at, there is a wrecked Highwayman, the same car that the Chosen One could repair and drive in Fallout 2. While in vanilla New Vegas, there's just a bunch of old junk in the back, if we take into account the J.E. Sawyer mod, a mod created by one of the developers of New Vegas, that adds back in a lot of cut content that the devs were unable to implement due to the time constraints. The Highwayman now has an armored Vault 13 jumpsuit in the trunk, the same jumpsuit worn by the Chosen One. and that's the most convincing evidence there is. There's some smaller bits that kind of line up, such as Nobark finding a talking rat, which the Chosen One did, Nobark having Enclave propaganda in his shack, and that gun, which can only be found in Novak. It's the same model as the 223 pistol found in Fallout 1 and 2. So some things line up and some don't, and some require a lot of coincidence. Maybe the Chosen One got into a wreck and lost his memory and ended up as Nobark. Who knows? But the question still stands, why would he be in Vegas in the first place? I'm more inclined to believe the theory that Bruce Isaac stole the Highwayman from Mr. Bishop, the Chosen One's son, and crashed it in Novak while he was fleeing New Reno. But at the end of the day, the Chosen One's fate is ultimately left up in the air, and they more than likely just remained in Arroyo until they passed away. 17 years after the end of Fallout 2, Fallout 3 begins in 2258, as the Lone Wanderer, potentially named Albert, as it's the default name and an homage to the Vault Dweller from Fallout 1, is born at Jefferson Memorial to James and Catherine, who sadly passed away shortly after giving birth. It's also been somewhat confirmed that the Lone Wanderer is male, as multiple sources of media, after the game released, refer to them as he or James's son. Also, somewhat canonically speaking, the Lone Wanderer should technically be mixed race, as by default, Catherine is African American and James is Caucasian, which we can see during the game's opening before we customize her character. Again, I say this is somewhat canon because you never actually see Catherine besides her legs, and there was a photo that was cut and never actually appears in-game. Overall, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. I thought I'd just mention it anyway. Taking his son to Vault 101, James and his child live in peace for 19 years until James abruptly leaves the vault, prompting his son to track him down. Arriving at Megaton, the Lone Wanderer does not destroy Megaton and helps Moira Brown complete the Wasteland Survival Guide. And in her afterword, she writes that Megaton's Sheriff Sims' son, Hardin, becomes the Sheriff of Megaton in 2297, and that he blames the Lone Wanderer for his father's death. He likely died after the Lone Wanderer reported Burke to Sims, which led to a confrontation and Burke pulling a gun and shooting Sims in the back. After eventually finding his father trapped in Vault 112, the Lone Wanderer brings him back to the Jefferson Memorial in order to complete Project Purity and purify the water in the capital wasteland. However, the Enclave arrives and ruins everything. Sacrificing himself, James kills a handful of Enclave soldiers, allowing the Lone Wanderer to escape to the Citadel and join the Brotherhood of Steel. Eventually, the Lone Wanderer is captured by the Enclave and is brought to their stronghold at Raven Rock, where he swiftly blows it up and rallies the Brotherhood of Steel to retake Jefferson Memorial and activates Project Purity to purify the water of the capital wasteland. 2 weeks later, following the Battle of Project Purity, the Lone Wanderer wakes from a coma where Elder Lyons names them as a Knight of the Brotherhood of Steel, and together they invade Adams Air Force Base and wipe out the remaining Enclave remnant. After that, we don't really know much. He just kind of disappears. Even though Fallout 4 takes place in 2287, 10 years after Fallout 3, and there are multiple returning characters, not a single one of them even mentions him. And what's even stranger is the Brotherhood of Steel don't mention him. No mention of his involvement in Project Purity or his role in the Adams Air Force Base raid. You think someone of that magnitude would be mentioned at least somewhere. And to me, this kind of speaks of revisionist history. Elder Maxon and his Brotherhood of Steel on multiple occasions hate on Elder Lyons, ignoring the fact that he basically saved the Brotherhood of Steel and revitalized their chapter. They couldn't wipe away the actions of an elder due to how long he was part of the Brotherhood. Instead, they could just badmouth him. But for someone who was part of a chapter for a handful of years, they could easily wipe him away. Now, why would they do this? Well, maybe it's because he disagreed with the way the Brotherhood was turning after the death of Elder Lyons. Fight after fight eventually led him to abandoning the chapter, and because of how they unceremoniously pushed him away, they decided to wipe him off the record. Now, the Lone Wanderer lives up to his name and just wanders the wasteland. Or he's Deacon. Some of you might remember a very shitty video I made quite a few years ago discussing this theory. I'll just cover the basics here. The theory states that we know 3 facts about Deacon. 1, Deacon is a compulsive liar. 2, Deacon isn't his real name. And 3, Deacon has gone through multiple facial reconstruction surgeries. That is all fact. He also tells us that he was part of a gang called the University Point Death Claws, which harassed synths, which eventually escalated to the point of a lynching, which caused him to step away and settle down with a woman named Barbara, who was later executed by the Death Claws because, unknown to Deacon, she was a synth. Deacon killed the UP Death Claws, then joined the Railroad. There's no real evidence to suggest that the UP Death Claws ever existed because if we travel to University Point, there's no reference to them in the slightest, so the story could potentially be fake. With Deacon as a companion, he will make a handful of references to the Capital Wasteland.
I ever tell you about the time I was in Capital Wasteland? Now there's a tale. The Brotherhood. In Capital Wasteland, they really weren't bad. But now...
Your thoughts?
I'm convincing the next raw recruit that I'm actually President Eden. Think I can pull it off?
Deacon also says he's had multiple facial reconstruction surgeries. The Lone Wanderer had the same access to facial reconstruction after meeting Dr. Horace Pinkerton in Rivet City. The Lone Wanderer in Fallout 3 was 19. Fallout 4 takes place 10 years after the fact, placing the Lone Wanderer around 29. Since Deacon continually changes his face, we don't know exactly how old he is. So potentially, he might not look 29, but internally he could be. His name Deacon means a member of a clerical order ranked below a priest in Christianity. This could be a reference to all the biblical references in Fallout 3, as well as homage to his father, who kept a framed note of Revelations 21:6. Also, just in case some of you don't know, Deacon is not a synth.
I could be a synth. I could be the best damn synth that ever synthed.
He lies about it, and if you kill him, he doesn't drop a synth component. There's also a couple other smaller things, but basically it all boils down to Deacon's story about the UP Death Claws being an allegory for what happened to him with the Brotherhood. That being Sarah Lyons was replaced by a synth, and over time, she and the Lone Wanderer eventually fell in love and got married. Somehow the Brotherhood, or the Outcast, discover the truth and conspire with their true leader, Arthur Maxon, to eliminate her. And this would explain why Maxon is so aggressively anti-synth, because Sarah Lyons was extremely important to him. Hell, we even know from terminals around the Citadel that he had a crush on her. So when finding out that someone so important to him was replaced, he felt disgusted and betrayed, and thus began his hatred for synths. So it's likely that a young Maxon gave the order to assassinate her while out on a mission. And that mission could have involved Paladin Dance, because when he's revealed to be a synth and the Soul Survivor tracks him down, Dance states that,
"I'm not surprised Maxon sent you. He never liked to do the dirty work himself."
So basically, while on a mission, the Lone Wanderer and Sarah are ambushed by the Brotherhood of Steel, and she quote-unquote fell in battle. The Lone Wanderer then killed the Brotherhood members who betrayed them, maybe even leaving Dance alive as a warning or whatever, learned the truth of why they killed Sarah, and then fled to the Commonwealth to learn more about synths and eventually join the Railroad in honor of his wife. Before leaving, he had facial reconstruction surgery, and thus the Lone Wanderer disappeared without a trace, and Deacon was born. There's also a third theory that the Lone Wanderer just got into a spaceship, left Earth, and disappeared. I don't know, you can choose whatever theory you believe, but whatever the true fate of the Lone Wanderer is, we know he simply just disappeared. Now, the Courier themselves is perhaps the most blank slate character in any Fallout game. We don't know where they're from, how old they are, what their real name could be, their gender, or again, literally anything. However, we can speculate on what they did in the end. Based off of the Fallout TV show, I would assume that the Mr. House ending is the canon one, and there's a few reasons to back up that claim. First, and kind of a more technical reason, Mr. House actually appears in the final episode of the show. So why would they introduce him in the show only to say he was killed off in the game, when instead an actual achievable ending in New Vegas lets him live? I feel like they introduced him for a reason, and that reason is because he now controls New Vegas, which is why Hank is going there, and we'll see more of his influence next season, perhaps resulting in a massive confrontation and a battle of New Vegas. Secondly, if I were to assume what a canon courier would do, I would put my money on them just sticking to the job they were hired to do. Bring their client the package. They probably don't have any revolutionary visions of an independent Vegas, or a heavily taxed Vegas, or an enslaved Vegas. They probably just want to do the job and get paid like they continually did in the past, thus siding with their client, Mr. House. And thirdly, keeping Mr. House alive is just a good idea because that character is so interesting and would be a fantastic addition to the show and would make a lot of sense based on what we'll discuss for the Soul Survivor. Jesus, watch me be wrong and it's the Legion ending. Anyway, as for the Courier themselves, we know in the years to come after the Battle of Hoover Dam, they left to go watch over the Big Empty, caring for it and keeping its discoveries safe until they were needed to help others. Really, only time will tell what became of the Courier, and we will most likely know more when Season 2 of the Fallout show is released. When that happens, I'll make an updated version of this video. We know for a fact that the Soul Survivor is either a war vet named Nate or a lawyer named Nora. If I were to put my money on it, I'd say the canon Soul Survivor is Nate because I really don't think a lawyer could survive in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and someone with real combat training stands a much better chance at getting past those rad roaches in the beginning. Anyway, with the release of the Fallout show, we know for a fact that of the 4 endings of Fallout 4, 2 of them could be canon. The Brotherhood ending or the Minutemen ending. We know this because the actual Prydwen arrives in the West Coast and the Commonwealth Brotherhood is mentioned, confirming that the Brotherhood are still active there 9 years after the events of Fallout 4. The only 2 endings where the Prydwen isn't destroyed and the Brotherhood maintains a presence in the Commonwealth are the endings mentioned, Brotherhood and Minutemen. I would like to believe that the canon ending is the Minutemen one, but a part of me also believes that the Brotherhood ending might be more likely because during the Brotherhood questline, we repair Liberty Prime and use it to assault the Institute, and I would be shocked if Liberty Prime doesn't appear in the show at some point. Liberty Prime could have been disassembled and packed up into the Prydwen, like he was before, and shipped to the West Coast to assist in reestablishing Brotherhood dominance. And if Mr. House is the canon ending of New Vegas, then how poetic would a Battle of New Vegas be if Mr. House's company's greatest invention led the assault? Or perhaps the sole survivor assisted the Brotherhood in rebuilding Liberty Prime, but ultimately assaulted the Institute with the Minutemen, basically completing all of the Brotherhood quests up to the point of no return, then completing the assault with the Minutemen. This would make the sole survivor a paladin for the Brotherhood of Steel, and then the general of the Minutemen. But based on common banter heard throughout the Commonwealth, the Minutemen are more or less a bunch of rednecks with big guns. So the likelihood of a successful assault would kind of be a reach. So it stands to reason that the sole survivor, a man who served in the 2nd Battalion, 108th Infantry Regiment of the US Army, would probably flock to a well-organized military faction rather than a ragtag group of wastelanders he needs to put together himself. I'm completely 50-50 on this, and both endings kind of achieve the same thing. The Institute and the Railroad are both gone in both endings. What I mean is whether or not the Brotherhood destroys the Railroad is now irrelevant, because if the Minutemen destroyed the Institute and spared the Railroad, synths are now a non-factor, and the Railroad as an organization would likely dissolve away. So one ending, the Railroad is gone by violence, and the other ending, the Railroad is gone by disbanding. In the end, the sole survivor either settled into his role as the general of the Minutemen while being a part-time paladin of the Brotherhood of Steel, or fully dedicated himself to the Brotherhood and achieved the rank of Sentinel after the destruction of the Institute. Like I said, either ending has equal amounts of validity, and we will most likely find more clues as to what actually occurred in the next season of the show.